The most important goal for graphic designers is to make sure that their designs are noticed by people. But a successful design should do much more than that. It needs to also engage and even captivate or shock a specific group of people, the intended audience of a project. But how can you predict what your viewers' reaction and emotional response will be when they look at your work? Well, this is where the psychology of design can help you out. I like to think of the Gestalt Principles as the grammar of visual communication. Every language around the world relies on grammar, which sets the rules, creates consistency, and makes sure that everyone can understand each other. It's interesting, but if you think about it, we don't actually learn in school how to understand things when we look at them. So visual perception is almost instinctive. It's something that we learn as we grow up. And even as a newborn, we already start to process our environment by looking at it. Of course, at the beginning of our life, we use our other senses more, like touching and tasting things. But as we grow older, we end up relying more and more on our eyes to understand our environment and to be able to interact with it. Apparently, almost 50% of our brain is dedicated purely to process the visual stimuli that we are constantly bombarded with during daytime. And even while we are asleep, our brain projects images which we understand as dreams. And I like to think of dreams being some kind of exercise for the brain. So even when we are not looking at things, it is trying to flex those muscles that we are using when we are again looking at things and trying to understand what we are seeing. So coming back to the Gestalt Principles and why it is important to learn about it, remember I said that we don't have to learn how to see things. That's completely true. However, as a designer or graphic designer, we need a better understanding how people will perceive the designs that we create to be able to effectively communicate the message that the project is about. In this video, I'm going to give you a brief background where the Gestalt Principles are coming from, and we will briefly analyze this Unilever logo on the board just to see how the Gestalt Principles can be applied to any kind of design. So first of all, Gestalt Principles are actually coming from the area of psychology. It started by 3 psychologists in Austria and Germany in the early 20th century. And the most important quote that sums up really well the whole idea behind Gestaltism is by Kurt Koffka, who said, "The whole is other than the sum of its parts." And the word other is very important. So it's not more like Aristotle said, but it is something else or something different. You can see the example of the bicycle. When we have all of its parts laid out and when we have it all put together, even though it's the same exact components, with the right configuration or assembly, it will be able to carry us from A to B. It becomes a vehicle. And that is something we definitely can't say about all of its parts separately or just laid out like this, only once they are put together in the right way. And this is a great analogy to think about design as well, where you have typography, images, shapes, colors, contrasts, so on and so forth. You can use all of these things, but if you're not putting them together correctly or effectively, then your design won't look good or won't get the attention of viewers. Only when you put everything together in the right balance, the right order or right hierarchy, that's when you will create an effective design. There's another important underlying term used in the Gestalt Principles called emergence. And essentially what this means is that we tend to look at the entire object before seeing its individual parts. So again, thinking as a graphic designer, that means that if you create a poster, for instance, people will look at the poster in its entirety before they start to look at smaller details like people in the poster or the title or subtitle and so on and so forth. And why is it important? Because for us designers, we have to always create a pleasing composition or overall look of our design, but we also have to make sure that people will be able to find all the relevant information once they spend a bit more time looking at what we created. So looking at the current design of the Unilever logo, we can immediately pick up a couple of the Gestalt principles that are applied here, like simplicity, which is also referred to as law of pregnance, which we can see in all of these little icons here. They are all simplified, almost to abstraction. But if we pay attention, we can still make out and recognize a couple of things here. Like there is a little bee here. We also have a bird. There is a pepper. There is a palm tree. There is a symbol, which is for recycling. There's another symbol, the heart, which can be interpreted as love. But in this context, it's more likely to indicate healthy products. So why do you think it was important to apply the rule of simplicity to all of these icons in this logo? Well, if you think about it, if they were too complex and there were too much details on them, it would end up becoming too complex and distracting, and definitely it wouldn't work as a logo. Unilever is a massive company with so many brands inside it, and to be able to communicate that complexity, the designer decided to highlight many aspects of these brands without them becoming too overwhelming or overpowering. And this takes us to the other rule that's applied here, which is called figure ground, which means that we can look at something like this shape here as a unified outline of the letter U. So that is something that we would understand as the ground or background, and all of the little icons inside it are the figures or the foreground elements. Now, since there's so many little icons packed into this shape of the U, there's also a couple of additional rules applied to make it aesthetically pleasing. One of which is quite obvious, is similarity. So basically that means that all of these icons feel similar to each other. So they all use the same color. They all have round edges, so there's no sharp corners in either of them. And if you pay attention to the icons, they all seem to be following the shape of the U. So that is something that we call common fate. They all feel like going or flowing in the same direction. And another interesting thing that we can see here is that it wasn't necessary to create a solid outline for the letter U for it to look like it's closed. So we perceive it as a closed shape even though it has gaps around it. And that is a perfect example and use of the Gestalt principle called closure. Symmetry is another rule that we can see here. So if we have this line here in the middle, you can see that not only the letter U is aligned to that, but even the text at the bottom is symmetrically aligned to the letter above it. This helps to create a pleasing balance in this composition. And if we are looking at the text itself here at the bottom, there's also another rule applied there, which is called continuation or continuity, where again, our brain can easily connect this and understand it as a single word, even though there are gaps in between the letters. Now this works well mainly because this looks like a handwritten text or manuscript, while if this text was set in different typeface like a serif or sans serif font, then it would already cause issues if we had these big gaps between those letters, especially if these gaps are uneven. And finally, one other rule that we can see being used here is proximity, which in this case connects the letter mark, which we have here on the top, and the word mark that we have underneath it. So the closeness of these two elements and the fact that they are stacked on top of each other will help to always see this as a single unit, a logo, even when it's placed on an advert, for instance, together with the logos of other brands. So to summarize, the importance of Gestalt principles is that as a designer, you need to be able to emphasize visual relationships, and you can only do this effectively by understanding how your viewers will interpret or perceive the visual information that you are presenting to them. Thanks a lot for watching. Like and share this video if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified whenever we release new videos. Click on the link on my right and start your membership today to get access to over 200 hours of training courses and personal mentoring by me and my team of creative professionals. Have fun learning, guys, and I will see you in the next one.